This is Season 2 of the Brew and Ink podcast.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Brew and Ink podcast. How's everyone doing tonight? Steven, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Evie?
I'm good.
Long weekend.
Good.
Long weekend.
It's a very,
Very.
long weekend.
Yeah.
It started Thursday for me. So
Sarah, how you doing?
I felt like this weekend was really fast. But I also stayed up almost all of Saturday night to watch The Haunting of Hill House. So
Yeah? How was
It
that?
happens,
Till, like,
doesn't it?
4
When you
a.m.
start. Yeah, I ended at 3
I could
a.m.
not stop.
It was that good, or?
It's that good.
Okay.
For me. I mean,
Wow.
I
I'm
don't
gonna
know
check it
about,
out.
I loved it.
Okay.
And I'm going to watch it again because now I have to find all the
The things in the
ghosts.
background.
Yeah, but I did not see them all, so now I have to go find them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you this right now. Apparently, my son plays a video game that the microphone sounds like a smoke detector from far away. So, halfway through my binging, because he went to bed, obviously, before I was done at 4 a.m., but I kept hearing this sound, and I was like, oh my God. There's a ghost with a smoke detector. I mean, I was panicking. I made him turn the game off. Then he was like, Mom, I'm telling you it's in the game. I was like, no, that's not a thing. Sure enough, it was some weird reverb from this guy's mic. But I was like, I have watched too much of this show. I am literally having a panic attack over this noise. But if you like...
So highly recommended. That's
if you
what you're
like
trying
to be
say.
scared and
Oh,
you like a
yes.
good story...
I love both of those things.
Camera
It's
work
not a
was
lot of
good.
like really. There's no gore or that kind of thing, but it's a
Yeah.
lot of jump scares, a lot of loud noises.
Nice.
It's really really good. So yeah.
Yeah, it was a long weekend for a couple reasons. One of them, and we'll have a whole other episode to go over this. But we were at the Gwinnett County Library Gala or Gala. Did they ever decide which one? Were
No,
gonna say?
they confused me even more with their
I
jokes.
felt the same. But it was a great evening. We'll talk more about that at a future point. But let's just kind of get into our topic for the night. As I said in the interview with Bethany and Michelle from last week, I seem to have chosen a lot of career paths where I get rejected a lot.
Oh, no.
And there are some times when, I'm kind of moping around the house and my wife goes, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, this publisher or this thing happened or whatever, I just, you get all like angsty about it. So we have these, we're actually putting ourselves out in front of people, and sometimes the most vulnerable things about us that we're actually putting out in front of people and going, do you like it? And it can be a very kind of anxious thing.
Or you think you've knocked it out of the park. You're like, oh man,
you
this
think,
means so
yeah.
much to me.
Yeah.
And then someone else reads it and like, I don't get it.
I kind of fell asleep.
Yeah.
But my mom likes my writing, so that's
Yeah.
always a good sign.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, and if you only ever share it with your mom, you never
Yeah.
have
Doing
to get
good.
rejected.
Here's to moms everywhere.
That's right.
That's right. Cheers to moms.
So I thought maybe we could talk tonight about how we deal with rejection, because that's the further you go into your writing career, the more you're going to deal with rejection. And a few episodes ago when I interviewed Brian Davis, and he said he was rejected 200 times over 8 years with the same book, mind you. And I said, well, how many times did you rewrite this book? And I think he said like 25.
Like 20 something, yeah.
He rewrote the whole book 25 times.
My word.
And so obviously he has learned a lot about writing. And so a big part of being a successful writer, I think it was Neil Gaiman or somebody like that said, the difference between a successful writer and an amateur is the successful writer didn't give up. Like basically like the resilience of going forward when you get rejected, when you think you were awesome and you read it the next day and it's crap or whatever, all of those kind of things. So how do we deal with rejection? How do we deal with that?
Or even the thought of our own self-rejection. Maybe it's not even from someone else, but maybe we didn't hit the deadlines that we thought we were going to hit, or we didn't kind of, reach the same story that we had in the beginning. Like, how do we overcome not giving up just from our own
Yeah.
sense of rejection. But for me, it's a lot of tissues and chocolate, crying in the corner.
Wow.
Wow.
All right.
No,
So manly.
yeah. No, I think
That should be a short story.
tissues and chocolate. I think doing writers groups is one of the big keys to doing that, because not only do you get accustomed to someone commenting on your writing in a way that is a constructive criticism, but also it gives you a chance to share more than once, and not just that one opportunity you had with a friend somewhere and maybe they didn't like your story, and so then you kind of like became, a shut-in with your, you held it back. And so going somewhere where once a month, once every other week or whatever, someone's going to say, okay, what do you have for us? And then you go, ooh, well, I not really prepared to share this, but okay, I'll read it. And then everyone goes, no, that's really good. And
Or this is what we liked about
or
it.
this is what we
You're
liked
really
about
good
it.
at this.
Or
Or whatever.
they reject you.
or they reject it, and then you go back to the drawing board, and then you're going to have another opportunity to share. If you don't feel like you have another opportunity, you're more likely to not try again.
Right, yeah.
And that's also, I think, why writers' conferences are good too, because they give you that big goal, throughout the year. You're like, okay, I'm going to accomplish all this unto going to this event, and then once I'm at that event, then I'll set my next set of goals. And if you don't have something that can give you these different intervals to try again along the way, I think that's a big help for not giving up.
Yeah, good. What do you think, Bill? You've been querying a lot of agents.
Rejection.
Yeah, you've been querying a lot of
Rejection.
agents recently. What do you think?
I could sit and grip the edge of the table and wait with bated breath for these guys to answer me one way or the other, and I don't. I have to tell you this. I had my fastest rejection ever
Wow, that's exciting.
this week. Literally, I sent it out at 4:00 in the afternoon last Thursday, last Monday, and I got it back, a rejection, by 9:00 the next morning.
Nice.
Well, it's efficient.
It's efficient. The worst
And
rejections.
they're opening it.
Well, that is that. And I know it was an assistant that opened it and was scanning it for the agent, because the assistant's the one that responded. She had her signature on it, not the agent's signature. So there's no BS there. And that was fine, because it was one of the agents that I looked at this agent and said, this is one that I could gather the least information on.
Yeah.
I know she works for a big house, but she's not out there putting her information out there and saying, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And so it's really difficult to prepare yourself to talk to those people and query those people. So rejection is something I deal with frequently, because I do write a lot of queries. A lot of the rejections I get are simply not answers.
Yeah.
3 months, 4 months later, I'm looking at this list of queries I've sent out, and I realize this guy never sent anything back. Never
get
said
ghosted.
anything. Yeah, completely.
just
and it doesn't. I don't think it means they hate your work. I think it just means that it doesn't. They're
get
going
there.
through this stuff so fast.
Yeah, it doesn't get
When
there.
we're talking publishers and agents, they're going through this stuff so fast that it's not personal.
It's not the
And
right timing.
It's not the right timing. And I have to look at it that way. I also have to look at it realistically and say, okay, now I go back and I look at my first book and say, what utter crap this was. Okay, it was a great story. My wife loved it. My mother didn't love it. By the way, mothers don't love everything you write.
Oh no, my mom does not read my stuff.
Okay, and just want to put that one out there. So, but I look at it now and say, as far as my best quality, no. It's time to tear that apart and throw away this character and this character and this character, because I was getting rejected for a reason in this case.
Yeah.
And that was, the writing wasn't up to standard. There was too much to the story, and it needed to be thinned down and turned into one story, not 5 stories meshed together like I wrote it. And it was so exciting that way for me. But it was wrong. It's not marketable that way, and that's why I was rejected. So when I get rejection, I have to ask why. And it is never personal, and I don't take it personally. I don't stress over it, because it's not personal to me. It's my work, and that's where I am. I'm figuring out that it's my work, and this is what I have to do to be a better writer, is to look at that and ask myself why that was turned away.
Yeah, and it's really important to point out here that, especially when you're dealing with, it's one thing to get a bad review on Amazon, where somebody goes, "You suck" or something, like oh, you didn't even read it, right? But when you're dealing with industry professionals, and they're not always nice people, but it's really important to not take it personally. That is actually a really important thing, to realize that it's the wrong time. It's not what they're looking for.
Well,
they don't particularly connect with it, but that doesn't. For most of them, it's really not a personal thing.
It also means I've learned more about that person and what they're looking
Right.
for.
So you have to
And
respond.
the next time I write something,
Yeah.
I might be more on target to what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And that's the way I deal with rejection as I brush it off, and I'm in complete denial about how personal it is.
Well, but my point is you really have to respond in a kind and gracious manner. Like, thank you for looking at it. Thank you for responding. Just be generous, because you don't know when you're going to have to deal with this person
typically
again.
we don't get an opportunity really to respond, because if you're getting a message back that says we're not interested at this time, they really don't want to hear from you again at this time. They don't want to waste. You don't want to waste their time with that. But you can come back to them 3-4 months later and say, "Hey, I sent you this. You very graciously responded to me, and now I'm responding back with something that I've done that I think is better and more up your alley."
And a lot of times, if you're lucky, the rejection comes with that extra caveat of, please send me something in the future. I want to see your future work.
And I have gotten that before, which was really hugely encouraging. That I didn't even take that as a rejection. I took that
Those
as
are the best rejections.
that was really encouraging, and now I'm that's fantastic.
So what do you think, Sarah? What do you think about the topic?
I love rejection.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Not said no one ever.
Said no one ever.
You know, this may not sound like it relates, but it does. I was listening to a TED Talk today by a guy that writes books about unintended consequences. Like, this thing happens, and then there's all this other stuff that happens on top of it. And this example that he gave was, before the Titanic sank, there was a boat that sank that was bigger than, or maybe the same size, but it sank because there were too many lifeboats on they did not assess for the weight of all those lifeboats. So it sank because of that. And then we have the Titanic that came along and obviously didn't have enough when it sank. But his point was that there's always going to be innovation, and then there's always going to be something that goes wrong after that innovation. And then we regroup and fix it, and then it gets better, and then that thing happens, and then we have a failure, and then we regroup. So what I got me thinking about was, like, writing is a process, right? So, like, the more times I write, the more refined my skills become, the more my writing evolves. And when I send a story to someone at one stage, they might like that, but then they might not like it at another stage, but then there will be someone else who does, and vice versa. But I also learn more about what I'm writing for, what's my purpose, right? Like, I have never really written with the thought that other people are going to read it, because, like, I'm super nervous. I don't want to share it with people. So, like, I write because I want to get a story out. And the way that I process some things in my life that are hard to deal with is through fiction. So, but when I was listening to this guy talk, it's like, what I think is rejection is maybe not that at all. And what I think is going to happen, it's just like failure. It's just like anything else. Whatever my perception of it is usually the worst part, like the fear of that thing. Once it really actually happens, because the thing is, I've been rejected. I've failed. So there's no real fear in the aftermath of that. The hard part comes in the pre-rejection, the pre-failure, all the stewing in my thoughts, and no one's going to like this, and I'm going to be hated, and all this crap that's not real. It's not real. I mean, rejection's part of life. And if I don't learn, like, and to be fair, I kind of do like it in a way, because it sharpens me. If I never get rejected, or nobody ever tells me, hey, I really didn't like that story, then I'm going to think I'm the bee's knees, and I'm never going to get any better.
Yeah, there was, I forget who said it recently, but I was on a podcast or something where they said sometimes the worst thing you can do is succeed at it the first time.
Right.
Because you actually don't know what you did right.
Right.
And the pressure is on, right? Like, you think about people who wrote a really great first novel. And then, I mean, I'll be honest with you, George Saunders is one of my favorite writers of all time. His only novel that he's published, I don't like it. Because to me, he's a short story writer. and he didn't do so well. But
Right.
it's like when you become this, what do you call it, like hilltop writer, you have a lot of people expecting everything you do to be
Yeah.
this thing.
Well, it's like our last Interbrew. Bethany said her first story she wrote was accepted, and right off the bat it was a success. And she's like, and now I'm trying to write again, and everything's getting rejected and whatnot, and she's having to go through that. Like, first step was a success, and now she's having to figure out how to kind of do it again.
Yeah. What do you think, Evie? Any thoughts?
Well, I'm so new that I haven't had much rejection, which is nice. But I do agree with you, Sarah, that without rejection, we can't. I should rephrase. Without critique, we cannot move forward.
Yeah.
And so rejection, I agree, is a good thing. But for me, it takes a minute.
Yeah.
If you start reading and you're expecting a specific response or like they're gonna love this, and then they don't, that silence for me is a killer. Like I can get depressed for like days on end before I'm like, all right, it's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Get yourself back up. And sometimes it has more to do with someone else's mood. Like, I get really weird. I get paranoid. And so I'm, like, reading to someone, and they just don't respond. Especially my husband is a great example. He's not into reading. And so he doesn't really care about stories or anything like that. He's a great supporter of what I do, but he's not.
I can
Sure,
totally see
yeah.
the look on his face.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, yeah, that's good. And I'm like, are you serious? That's all you've got to say?
Did you hear anything I read?
Were you listening? And I can be like really down, and it takes me a day to be like, listen, my husband is not that kind of person.
Right.
It could be the best story in the world. That's exactly how he would respond. But inside, at least a good few hours, I'm like, I'm so deeply hurt. I suck. Nothing in the world is going to, fix this. I'm a horrible writer, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I have a friend on Facebook and Instagram, and she's like a personal trainer, and I was checking out her profile the other day, and her profile basically says, find something you love, try it, and fail, and then try again. Like that's her, like that was her kind of motto, and I was like, I kind of like that because again, it's one of those things where years ago Micah was, I don't know, he was 4, maybe 5, and we went on this family vacation, and I was like, is there going to be a basketball goal? And I went out, and I'm shooting hoops, and Micah's 4 or 5, and he wants to be like Dad, and he can't even get it to the rim, right? And he's just, and the next thing I know, I look over there, and he's just sitting on the side, pouting. And I'm like, what's wrong, buddy? Are you frustrated you're not? He said, I'm losing. I said, and it just, I can't take any credit for it. It just came to me. I said, you're not losing, you're learning. That's a difference. Like, you have to look at it differently. And I think that successful people are able to do that with whatever they're doing. Like, there are people who might be listening to this who aren't writers, but with whatever they're doing, the ability to fail at it, Abraham Lincoln famously only won one election in his whole life. And that was the presidential, right? But without his influence and leadership during that really difficult time in our history, right? But it's just one of those things where he just kept trying. He just kept plugging away and through a lot of difficulties.
I think if you build failure and rejection into your success model, because I have to define what success is for me. What my idea of success is may look different than yours.
That's a good point.
Until I can say to myself, okay, actually, being really good at something is going to create people who don't like you. I mean, they say that it's lonely, quote unquote, at the top because it takes a certain amount of whatever grit to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of people get rejected at whatever it is in dating and they just stop. But if I can build that part of it into my idea of success when it happens, because it's inevitable, it doesn't crush me.
Good.
You know?
Well, I think that was a great discussion, and I think that it's really important to, as you were saying, to have people around you. I agree. It's a really important thing to have people around you who hold you accountable, who say, okay, maybe we're crazy being writers, but that's okay. We can be crazy being writers and allow you to be yourself, encourage you, and give constructive critiques, because there are a lot of people out there who will just say you suck for no reason. especially in our age of social media, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Wow.
So let's get on to the readings for the night.
Wait, there's something else we're doing tonight?
There is something
yeah.
else we're doing. And speaking of rejection or accepting, someone's going to win this next round. And speaking of feeling rejected, I was thoroughly crushed by. Bill and I actually were thoroughly crushed by.
Oh no, I didn't worry about it. I was going to lose that one.
By Sarah in the last round. So Sarah will have her chance with
Against Katie.
Against Katie. So so tonight we're gonna have Evie and Steven. And what was the title that we got?
3 Trees Cemetery.
3 Trees Cemetery.
3 Trees Cemetery.
And you got
I got magical realism.
magical realism. And what did you get, Evie?
I got sci-fi.
Sci-fi.
Oh, yeah.
Say that a little more enthusiastically, please.
Okay, so we're going to start with Steven's version of 3 Trees Cemetery, all right? Go for it.
Alrighty, here we go. The 3 Trees Cemetery. A story of magical realism. Maria couldn't stand. She had been weeping for hours, her knees pressed into the soft, freshly packed dirt beneath her. She looked again through bleary eyes, her tears distorting the name on the headstone. Some small part of her helplessly hoped she would read some other name there carved into the tombstone, that all her crying and mourning had been misplaced, that it had all been a mistake. But there was no mistaking the name she knew so intimately she could still read the distorted lines through her blurry tears. Joseph Gabriel Marquez. Her son's headstone looked pristine next to her father's old and worn one, the shade from the tree above casting shadows across the surface of the stones. She remembered her father telling her stories about the significance of a tree watching over a grave. He used to say it was a guardian or protector of the past loved one's spirit. If you sat long enough under its shade, still and quiet, you could eventually commune with the one connected to the tree. She had tried sitting still and quiet, but her sobs had made that impossible. She had been there for what seemed like days without any communion but that of the rustling leaves. She remembered when this tree mysteriously showed up days after burying her father. She hadn't been to visit her father's grave in years. They had grown apart before his passing. Maria regretted those last few years when she hadn't talked to her father. She had blamed him for her husband, Jorge, leaving her. Her father had never really liked Jorge, didn't trust him. He tried everything to keep the two of them apart. But when Maria found out she was pregnant with Joseph, they decided to marry, even against her father's wishes. Eventually, her father convinced Jorge he needed to go stateside to earn a better living to support his family. Jorge had gone. Months went by without any word from him. Maria had assumed he had died, a corpse rotting in the desert. She had mourned his death for days, consoled only by the love of her 2-year-old son who would hold her at night and whisper to her, "It will be okay, Mommy." Maria never told Joseph about the letter she received years later. Jorge was alive and remarried. He wanted Joseph to come live with him where he would have more opportunities. She went on letting her son believe his father had died crossing the desert. She would never let him go live with the man who had abandoned them. Now, sitting on his grave, she wished she had. Maybe the doctors there could have saved her precious boy. Her father had been right about Jorge. Still, Maria blamed him. If he hadn't driven Jorge away, none of this would have happened. Maybe it was the grief of seeing his daughter so sad. Maybe it was the vile words Maria spoke only to him. Or maybe it was just age. But he took sick. His condition quickly declined, and within the year he passed away, leaving Maria alone to raise Joseph. Though Maria had no love for her father during the years before his passing, Joseph still loved his abuelo. They would spend hours together telling stories. Joseph's favorite was the one about the mountaintop where a tree grew that could connect the living with the dead. Joseph loved the story because it gave him hope to one day talk with his papi again. Maria felt guilty every time she heard Joseph ask his abuelo to tell it. Joseph, do you know why that mountain is special? It is believed to be a magical place, a place where we can commune and become one with those we have lost. When our loved ones are buried there, a tree will grow. There, under the shade of the tree, its roots will grow deep, enveloping our loved ones, protecting the memories of who they were. If you sit long enough in its shade, you can hear the voices of those preserved by the tree. It is believed the seeds of the tree can carry with it the spirit of your loved ones. They buried her father atop the hill he claimed was that magical place, where a tree did mysteriously grow over his grave, just like in his stories. Joseph had taken sick the year following his abuelo's passing. Joseph fought to hold on, a true survivor. Despite the inevitable, he always could uplift Maria's spirits with just his smile. He would whisper to her, "It will be okay, Mommy. Just bury me next to Abuelo." Often she would find Joseph had snuck out of his sick bed to spend time under the tree beside her father's grave. When he returned home, he would say he heard Abuelo's voice. He'd also bring with him a seed from a tree, saying, "What if it's a seed preserving Poppy's memories? What if he is trying to return to us?" Eventually, Joseph died clutching one of those seeds tightly in his hands. Maria had spent days lamenting at these graves beneath the tree, but as she looked up now, she saw there was a second tree, smaller than the first. Maria's heart broke at the beauty of the young tree. She lay down beneath the shade of these trees, her will to live sapped from her. Then she heard a soft whisper in her ear, "It will be okay, Mommy." Hearing that voice again was a heartache she never recovered from. Years later there came a man, heavy-hearted and with a mind to right what he had made wrong, bringing with him the fortune he had obtained for those he had left behind. But when Jorge crested the top of the hill, all he found were 3 majestic trees growing beside 2 graves and the form of a woman lying there, wrapped securely in the roots of the 3 trees.
Brewing Inc. is now syndicated on SeriousWriter.com. See them at SeriousWriter.com for resources, articles, videos, topical classes, and now a podcast, the Brewing Inc. Podcast, because we're syndicated on SeriousWriter.com.
And now we'll have Evie with science fiction reading her version of the 3 Trees Cemetery.
An old man walked down a dim-lit path between the lines of graves. His lantern swung side to side as he walked, casting strange shadows across the tombstones. There lie Mr. Folly. The old man smiled as he remembered how Mrs. Folly came to visit her husband every day at exactly noon with her little picnic basket in hand. And there lie dear Mrs. Fenley. Her beloved son, Mr. Ted Fenley, Jr., came down every Friday to place fresh flowers on her graves. And over there, he thought to himself, were the Grants, all buried together, 3 generations, all of which had lived happy and fulfilling lives before coming to rest together in harmony. Those were simpler times. Times when the town of Heron Falls was bustling with blessed lives. Back when there were but a handful of graves. When the cemetery went by a different name, Spring Valley Cemetery. But it has since been renamed. He rubbed his hand over the emblem on his jumper that read, Mr. Burroughs, groundskeeper, the 2 Trees Cemetery. He set his gaze on the 2 towering trees in the far right corner of the cemetery and trotted towards them. As the groundskeeper, Mr. Burroughs had seen many strange things, but none as strange as what he had seen the day that followed the visit from the mysterious man in the blue suit. The man came into town only for a day. He bought up 3 graves and asked to place a pre-inscribed tombstone on each. The first read, "Here lies the man who gave us life. We, the town, are forever grateful." The second read, "Here lies a man who meant no harm. We, the town, forgive him." And the third read, "Here lies a man whose life was taken for ours. May God forgive us. Then he went to the mayor and told him that these belonged to the town and were to be used as they saw fit. The mayor tried to ask questions, but he wouldn't have it. He got in his black sedan and drove off, never to be seen again. A few weeks later, a stranger came into town, a doctor of some sorts. He came presenting a new medication to the town. He went to visit Mr. and Mrs. Taylor in their shop and offered them new hope for their dying son. The Taylors truly had nothing to lose. Young Tommy had one foot in the grave, the life draining from his body hour by hour. The doctor came to his bedside and pulled out a brilliantly glowing blue jar. He unscrewed the lid, and out burst forth a sea of blue blossoms. Tommy breathed deep, and they entered his body. In moments, the boy's face blushed with color. The parents sobbed with joy. The town came together to celebrate new life. Others came forward, and he cured them all. His only request was let no one speak a word of his existence to anyone outside of the town of Heron Falls. But poor Mr. Wriggles was desperate. He wrote a letter to his dying sister in the next town over. 2 days later, the nameless doctor was found dead, the blue substance oozing from the pores of his body. The town gathered in mourning. They agreed to bury him in the first grave. They believed he deserved the words spoken over it. Here lies the man who gave us life. We, the town, are forever grateful. The whole town grieved. Eventually, the last tear was shed, and the town became quiet in the night. The next morning, they came in awe. Over the grave was a tree, a full-grown tree with its roots sunk deep into the grave. Its trunk had a brilliant glow. Like a breath, the light pulsed. Over the weeks, it grew blossoms, and many came to harvest it. They took it to their sick and had them breathe them in, but it did not cure. Instead, horror struck. Those who breathed it in were dead immediately. The bodies lie as lifeless as the doctors had a few days earlier. The town mourned with the great loss, but that was nothing compared to what was to come. A strong wind came from the east and pulled the tiny blossoms from the tree. They saturated the air, and all that walked in the streets breathed and fell to their deaths. Those left saw and placed cloths over their faces. They gathered their dead and buried them. Among the dead, but not due to the blossoms, was poor Mr. Wriggles. He could take the guilt no more, so he plunged a knife into his heart. They took him to the cemetery and agreed that he belonged to the second grave. So they buried him beneath the tombstone words, "Here lies a man who meant no harm. We, the town, forgive him." The next day, the townspeople peered out, not in awe, but in horror. There, over his grave, had grown a second tree, fully grown, its roots deeply sunk into Mr. Wriggles' grave. It pulsed as blue as the other had. No one dare go near it. All were afraid, but as time passed, there was no choice, for the world does not stop in the midst of chaos. Fathers with mouths to feed went back to work, and shop owners reopened their doors. But eventually, an unexpected storm swept in with powerful winds, and the little blue blossoms of the second tree took flight. The townspeople took shelter, but many were caught off guard. They breathed in little blue blossoms, but they did not die. The people watched from the windows. The curse must be over. Some rushed out to hug their loved ones, and some took caution and remained inside, with their doors locked and every crevice sealed. The next morning, the town had taken its second toll. Those who had breathed in the blossoms committed suicide in the night. They had plunged knives into their hearts, just as Mr. Wriggles had. Some loved ones had caught the attempt and stopped them, but they never ceased trying. One still night, they heard a car rumble down the road and stop in the street. Mrs. Taylor ran out to the car to warn whoever it may be not to stop in this town. As she reached the black sedan, a man stepped out. A man in a blue suit. Old Man Burroughs held his lantern tall, careful not to fall into the gaping 6-foot hole. He pulled the branches from in front of the tombstone and read, "Here lies the man whose life was taken for ours. May God forgive us." Bustling voices echoed and lights flickered behind him. That which was left of the town marched in with the man in the blue suit on their shoulders. The old man wiped a tear from his cheek and shook his head. He hung his lantern on a nearby hook and stepped into the shadows. The groundskeeper watched as the kicking body of the mysterious man was thrown into the grave. His neighbors, who were once decent people, shoveled dirt over his scrambling body. By tomorrow, the blue blossoms would know what to do. By tomorrow, we shall breathe life from the third tree.
snapping it in. Good job,
Yay.
everyone.
High five, Evie.
Yeah.
We did good.
So now we're going to hand it off to our listeners and
faithful
let them, our faithful listeners, and it's up to you guys now to get on to our Facebook page or especially our website and vote. So get on our website and vote, like, share, subscribe. We really need you guys to, if you're enjoying these stories, and I am, and I think a lot of people are, I've heard a lot of good feedback from people, then please like it, share it, subscribe, help us kind of get the word out. These have been really cool. So until next time,
We will raise that glass to inspiration.
Moonshine jar there.
Hey, it counts.
It's my drink.
Moonshine. We hadn't had moonshine in a while.
and it's up to you guys now to.
Wow.
Wow.
Are you threatening
That
our
was
faithful
so
listeners?
loud.
Evie is putting it out there.
Sorry. She
Vote
is
for her or
Cracking that
Or
knuckle.
else.
Or knuckle sandwich time. As my
Or
dad
like my
used to
son
say.
used to say, "You want a piece of meat?" Because he didn't know it was "you want a piece,
Piece
of
of
meat."
me?
So he'd walk up to me with his curly hair and he'd be like, "You know what, Mom? You want a piece of meat?"
You're like,
And I'm
yes,
like,
hot dog.
"I
Yeah.
do. I sure do."
Pepperoni?